Hi, welcome to Chapter 6, Part 2 for the Love of Man. Where we left off, Buck has developed this enormous affection for John Thornton to the point of ecstasy, where John Thornton is the first person he has ever loved. And so, as we continue reading Part 2 of Chapter 6, we're going to be looking at some of the ways that Buck expresses that love for John Thornton. So that winter at Dawson, Buck performed another exploit. Not so heroic, perhaps, but one that put his name many notches higher on the totem pole of Alaskan fame. This exploit was particularly gratifying to the three men, for they stood in need of the outfit which it furnished, and were enabled to make a long-desired trip to the Virgin East, where miners had not yet appeared. It was brought about by a conversation in the El Dorado saloon, in which men waxed boastful of their favorite dogs. That means where they're bragging about it. Buck, because of his record, was a target of these men, and Thornton was driven stoutly to defend him. At the end of half an hour, one man stated that his dog could start a sled with 500 pounds and walk off with it. A second bragged 600 for his dog, and a third 700. This means breaking the sled out of the ice. Pooh-pooh, said John Thornton. Buck can start 1,000 pounds. And break it out and walk off with it for 100 yards? Demanded Matheson, a bonanza king, he of the 700 vaunt. And break it out and walk with it for 100 yards, John Thornton said coolly. So they're having like this bragging rights moment. And John's like, my dog is the best. Buck is obviously the strongest. He can pull 1,000 pounds. And they're like, yeah, right. Break it out of the ice and then even continue to pull it farther. But John Thornton, throughout this, remains as cool. Well, Matheson said slowly and deliberately so that all could hear, I've got $1,000 that says you can't. And there it is. So saying, he slammed a sack of gold dust at the size of a bologna sausage down upon the bar. Nobody spoke. Thornton's bluff, if bluff it was, had been called. He could feel a flush of warm blood creeping up into his face, and his tongue had tricked him. He did not know whether Buck could start 1,000 pounds. Half a ton? The enormousness of it appalled him. He had great faith in Buck's strength and often thought him capable of starting such a load, but never as now had he faced the possibility of the eyes of a dozen men fixed upon him, silent and waiting. Further, he had no $1,000, nor had Hans or Pete. I've got a sled standing outside now, with 25-pound sacks of flour on it, Matheson went on with brutal directness. So don't let that hinder you. Thornton did not reply. He did not know what to say. He glanced from face to face in the absent way of a man who has lost the power of thought and is seeking somewhere to find a thing that will start it going again. The face of Jim O'Brien, a Mastodon king, an old-time comrade or friend, caught his eyes. It was a cue to him, seeming to rouse him to do what he never would have dreamed of doing. Can you lend me 1,000? He asked, almost in a whisper. I have to pause here to tell you that 1,000 back then is like 100,000 now. It is an insane amount of money. Sure, answered O'Brien, thumping down a plethoric sack by the side of Matheson's. Though it's little faith I'm having, John, that the beast can do the trick. And one of the reasons these men actually have enormous quantities of money is because they're looking for gold, and a lot of them have found it. So these men here have just bags of gold on them. The El Dorado, or saloon, or bar, emptied its occupants into the street to see the test. The tables were deserted, and the dealers and gamekeepers came forth to see the outcome of the wager and to lay odds. So they're all making bets on whether or not Buck can do this. Several hundred men, furred and midden, banked around the sled within easy distance. Matheson's sled, loaded with 1,000 pounds of flour, had been standing for a couple of hours, and in the intense cold, it was 60 below zero, and the runners had frozen fast to the hard-packed snow. Men offered odds of 2 to 1 that Buck could not budge the sled. A quibble or argument arose concerning the phrase break out. O'Brien contended it was Thornton's privilege to knock the runners loose, leaving Buck to break it out from a dead standstill. Matheson insisted that the phrase included breaking the runners from the frozen grip of snow. The majority of the men who had witnessed the making of the bet decided in his favor, whereat the odds went up 3 to 1 against Buck. There were no takers. Not a man believed him capable of the feat. Thornton had been hurried into the wager, heavy with doubt, and now that he looked at the sled itself, the concrete fact with the regular team of 10 dogs curled up in the snow before it, the more impossible the task appeared. Matheson waxed jubilant, or happily. 3-1, he proclaimed. I'll lay you another 1,000 at that figure, Thornton. What do you say? So at this point, everybody is betting against Buck. Thornton's doubt was strong in his face, but his fighting spirit was roused. The fighting spirit that soars above odds, fails to recognize the impossible, and is deaf to all save the clamor of battle. He called Hans and Pete to him, and their sacks were slim. In his own, the three partners could rake together only $200. In the ebb of their fortunes, their sum was total capital, yet they laid it unhesitatingly against Matheson's 600. The team of 10 dogs was unhitched, and Buck with his own harness was put into the sled. He had caught the contagion of the excitement, and he felt that in some way he must do a great thing for John Thornton. Murmurs of admiration at his splendid appearance went up. He was in perfect condition, without an ounce of superfluous flesh. That means unnecessary or extra. And 150 pounds that he weighed were so many pounds of grit and virility. His furry coat shone with the sheen of silk, and down the neck and across the shoulders his mane, in repose as it was, half bristled, and seemed to lift with every movement, as though excess of vigor made each particular hair alive and active. The great beast and heavy fore legs were no more in proportion with the rest of the body, where the muscles showed in tight rolls underneath the skin. Men felt these muscles and proclaimed them hard as iron, and the odds went down to 2-1. So at this point, some of them are reconsidering because they're like, wow, this dog is all muscle and so above and beyond that. Some of them are like, all right, it's not 3-1. We're going to at least knock it back to 2-1. This moment of touching the coat, so figuratively, it's to show the excitement where it says up here, half bristled and seemed to lift with every movement, as though excess of vigor made each particular hair alive and active. So literally what that's describing is static electricity, but it stands also metaphorically for the excitement that's building right before this race. Gad, sir, stuttered a member of the last dynasty, a king of the Skookum benches. I offer you 800 for him, sir, before the test, sir, 800 just as he stands. Thornton shook his head and stepped to Buck's side. You must stand off from him, Matheson protested. Free play and plenty of room. The crowd fell silent. Only could be heard the voices of the gamblers vainly offering 2-1. Everybody acknowledged Buck a magnificent animal, but 50-pound sacks of flowers bulked too large in their eyes for them to loosen their pouch strings. Thornton knelt by Buck's side. He shook his head in his two hands and rested cheek to cheek. He did not playfully shake him, as was his wont, or murmur soft love curses, but he whispered in his ear, "As you love me, Buck, as you love me," was what he whispered, and Buck whined with suppressed eagerness. So Thornton whispers his words of love to Buck to kind of fuel or get him going. The crowd watched curiously. The affair was growing mysterious. It seemed like a conjuration or a magic trick. As Thornton got to his feet, Buck seized his midden hand between his jaws, pressing it with his teeth and slowly releasing it half reluctantly. It was the answer in terms not of speech but of love, and Thornton stepped well back. And now in that earlier part of the chapter that we read, we saw that this is one of the ways that Buck expresses his love by like grabbing him on the hand. I had my first dog that I ever got when I lived on my own, Merlin, was a rescue dog, and he was 125 pounds, and he would terrify people. He was this big German Shepherd because he would try to express his love by just wrapping his whole giant mouth around their hand, which was fine with me because I knew what it was. So this is a very poignant part to me. All right. Now, Buck, he said. Buck tightened the traces, then slacked them for a matter of several inches. It was the way that he had learned. Gee! Thornton's voice rang out, sharp in the tense silence. Buck swung to the right, ending the movement in a plunge that took up the slack and with a sudden jerk arrested his 150 pounds, The load quivered, and from under the runners rose a crisp crackling. "Ha!" Thornton commanded. Buck duplicated the maneuver, this time to the left. The crackling turned into a snapping, the sled pivoting and the runners slipping and grating several inches in the side. The sled was broken out. Men were holding their breaths, intensely unconscious of the fact. "Now mush!" Thornton's command cracked out like a pistol shot, and Buck threw himself forward, tightening the traces with a jarring lunge. His whole body was gathered compactly together in the tremendous effort, and the muscles writhing and knotting like live things under his silky fur. His great chest was low to the ground, and his head forward and down, while his feet were flying like mad in the claws, scarring the hard park snow in parallel grooves. The sled swayed and trembled, half started forward. One of his feet slipped, and one man groaned aloud. Then the sled lurched ahead in what appeared a rapid succession of jerks, though it never really came to a dead stop again. Half an inch, 2 inches. The jerks perceptibly diminished as the sled gained momentum, and he caught them up till it was moving steadily along. Men gasped and began to breathe again, unaware that for a moment they had ceased to breathe, and Thornton was running behind, encouraging Buck with short, cheery words. The distance had been measured off, and as he neared the pile of firewood which marked the end of the 100 yards, a cheer began to grow and grow, which burst into a roar as he passed the firewood and halted at command. Every man was tearing himself loose, even Matheson. Hats and mittens were flying in the air, and men were shaking hands. It did not matter with whom, and bubbling over in general incoherent babble. But Thornton fell on his knees beside Buck. Head was against head, and he was shaking him back and forth. Those who hurried up heard him cursing Buck, and he cursed him long and fervently, and softly and lovingly. Gad, sir, sputtered the Skookum Bench King. "I'll give you 1,000 for him, sir, 1,000, sir, 1,200, sir." Thornton rose to his feet. His eyes were wet. The tears were streaming frankly down his cheeks. "Sir," he said to the Skookum Bench King. "No, sir. You can go to hell, sir. It's the best I can do for you, sir." Buck seized Thornton's hand in his teeth, and Thornton shook him back and forth, and as though animated by a common impulse, the onlookers drew back to a respectful distance, nor were they again indiscreet enough to interrupt. So Buck did the impossible because he loves John Thornton. The end of this chapter is like there's this buildup of suspense, like, can he do it? Can he do it? This is this impossible task. And the lesson of this chapter is that with enough love, you can really do anything. The next lesson, chapter 7, it'll be broken into 2 parts, as all these other chapters have been, and that's going to be the final chapter of the novel. I hope you've enjoyed the story so far. When you're done listening to this, you can go and do the multiple choice. Remember, you have 2 chances, so if you don't do well the first time, make sure you come back and review the video. If you need any extra help, and you can always video chat with me or send me a message if there was anything that you had trouble understanding. You're all doing well and that you're enjoying the book so far. Signing out, Miss Moskowitz.